Shalom again from all of us here at Jewish Voice Ministries. Today is, believe it or not, day 277 since the October 7th massacres occurred in Israel and war broke out between Israel and the Islamic jihadist terrorist regime called Hamas. And what you're probably hearing in the news, no matter what channel you get your news from, this week especially, is the possibility of an imminent ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And just yesterday, the leader of Hezbollah, which, to remind you, in Arabic means the people of Allah, okay, a jihadist or Islamic holy war terrorist regime controlling much of the country of Lebanon right now, the leader of Hezbollah said, if Hamas agrees to the ceasefire, we also will agree to a ceasefire. What Hamas does, so the rest of us will do, and there will be peace in the region. Now, why is this attractive to Israel? Apart from the international pressure to stop this 9 months and counting war, why is this attractive to Israel? Well, first of all, peace is very attractive. A cessation, if only for a short period of time, to the violence gives the Israel Defense Force and the overall people of Israel a brief moment to rest, to be refreshed, and to not have missiles coming in if the ceasefire holds from Gaza, from Iran, from Lebanon, and from other places. So that's, of course, very important, actually, strategically right now. But there's another reason this is so attractive to Israel and to the Israeli government, who's strongly considering the ceasefire right now. And it's something you may not have considered before, that the Jewish ethic or the Jewish worldview is that every single individual human life matters. It's precious. And you and I may say, well, that's obvious. Of course, every human life matters. But let me tell you something, brothers and sisters, that idea, that worldview is not held by a significant portion of the world. And in jihadist circles in the Middle East, that's not understood. It's a very Machiavellian, the ends justify the means kind of thinking. And if this many people have to die for the larger purposes of Allah, for the larger purposes of the spread of Islam and jihad, Islamic holy war, so be it. Israel and the Jewish mindset don't think that way. We say, and the rabbis say, if you've saved one life, you've saved the entire world. And let me remind you that there's between 120 and 122, we're not quite sure, hostages remaining in Gaza. Again, now 9 months after the massacre, after these men, women, and children and elderly were taken hostage into Gaza by terrorists, there's 120 to 122 remaining. Every one of those lives matters to the Jewish mindset, to the Jewish worldview, and they matter to the Israeli government, they matter to the Israeli public, and I hope they matter for you too. I hope you're praying for a release for those hostages from whatever pits and caves and locked chambers they're being held in. And so part of Israel agreeing to this ceasefire is the possibility, and let me say that again, because history will judge whether this is true or not, the possibility that Hamas will begin to release the human beings who they're holding as pawns on the chessboard of this holy war that they incited on October 7th. And for Israel, there's tremendous pressure. There's there's marches and protests in the streets of Tel Aviv, even today, saying, bring our hostages home. And so for the sake of peace, however long or short-lived it might be, and for the sake of every one of those human lives being held against their will in Gaza right now, there's pressure to agree to a ceasefire. Now, we need to understand that we can't propose simple solutions to complex problems or we appear foolish. So let's look at the other side of the issue. What's the pressure on Israel not to agree to a ceasefire? And to answer that question, folks, I want to actually read you very quickly excerpts from the charter documents, the covenant, actually it's called, of Hamas, which means resistance in Arabic, it means violence in Hebrew, of Hamas and of Hezbollah, which means the people of Allah. You need to understand, this is a religious war for Islamic terrorist groups. Listen to what the Hamas covenant says. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. In the face of the Jews' usurpation, that means they're taking over of the land that Hamas believes belongs to the Arab peoples. In the face of the Jews' usurpation, it is compulsory, it is mandatory that the banner of jihad or holy war be raised. And then finally, from Article 6 and 7 of the Hamas covenant, the charter document, this is the why we exist statement of Hamas. who's currently offering a ceasefire. The day of judgment, the expected end, the messianic hope, if you will, of Islam, will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then, listen, then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." And if I may, stick with me just for another moment, let me read to you the theology and the philosophy of Hezbollah, who's currently operating out of Lebanon, but who is openly in their charter document pledging their allegiance to the radical Islamist leaders of Iran. Okay, so Hezbollah rolls up to Iran in where they get their marching orders. Listen to their theology. "Cursed are all Jews as blasphemers and damned for all time and throughout history. We believe that the destruction of Israel will bring about the reappearance of the Imam." Who's the Imam? Not to go too deep into Muslim theology. The Imam is the Shiite Islamic or the very observant Muslim Islamic Messiah. So you and I have a messianic hope, the return of Yeshua, Jesus, to Jerusalem to rule and reign from Israel over the nations of the world. Did you know the Muslims have a messianic hope as well? He's called the Imam. And listen, the destruction of Israel will bring about the reappearance or the coming again of the Muslim Messiah. This is why it's so difficult for Israel to agree to a ceasefire, even though temporary peace and possibly the return of some, or we pray all hostages, is on the table. You're agreeing to a temporary cessation of violence from two groups who, by their very founding documents, are obligated, compelled, the documents say, to not rest until not just the state of Israel, but the people of Israel are, and I quote, obliterated. This is the worldview. And let me propose, you can't negotiate with that. And so here we are, and I want to ask you to pray. Again, we're not proposing simple solutions to complex problems. That's foolishness. But join us, all of us here at Jewish Voice, and the tens of thousands of intercessors around the world who continue to take courageous steps to choose to stand with Israel and to keep standing for Israel, to pray. Would you pray for the wisdom from heaven for all those in Israel and the United States and other parties who also value individual human lives and dignity? Would you pray for wisdom for them in these negotiations? Would you pray for the Lord's kingdom to come and his will to be done in these negotiations? Would you pray that the evil agendas of jihadist terrorist groups are laid bare for the world to see? And would you pray that in the midst of all of this, in the darkest hour in the existence of the modern state of Israel, that the Lord would continue, as we're hearing testimony after testimony that he is, to open doors for ministry, and that the desperation the Jewish people in Israel and through anti-Semitic spikes the Jewish people around the world are feeling right now, that darkness, that hopelessness, that desperation, that the Lord, the God of Israel, through his son Yeshua, would meet and transform the lives not only of millions of Jewish people, but also of even those in the Middle East who would say right now that they're Israel's enemies. Did you know there's Arab Christians for whom God's given an inexplicable love for Israel and the Jewish people? They were taught to hate them. Even unfortunately in some of their churches, they were taught to hate the Jews. And yet the Lord deposited a deep understanding according to his word that he's called Israel beloved, and an understanding that reconciliation of Isaac and Ishmael, that deeply divided millennia-old struggle in the family of Abraham could be healed. But it can only be healed. There can only be peace through Yeshua, Jesus, the Prince of Peace. So we're praying for wisdom for leaders, just to recap. We're praying for an answer from heaven as this very difficult decision is made about a ceasefire or no ceasefire. We're praying for the peace of Jerusalem and protection of Jewish people and their neighbors. And we're praying for spiritual breakthrough in Israel, in Jewish communities around the world, and among those who have pledged themselves to be Israel's enemies. The Lord can do anything. Nothing's impossible for him. And we'll keep you updated with insights from the word, from the headlines, and from underneath the headlines, like what I've read you today, as we become aware of it. Thank you for making the courageous step to continue to stand with Israel. Shalom.